Here we are. I'll shrink this little thing on the side for me so I can see what's going on. Anyway, this is class 7 in our series of 14. So this is going to pass the midpoint today. This class in post-shooting trauma and police-involved shootings. I do welcome your questions if you come up with them at times. So I don't mean to mute everybody or keep everybody silent. I like your questions. Anyway, let's go on to the first slide. Police-involved shootings. When I came with the Chico Police Department in 1999, there had not been an officer-involved shooting in anybody's memory within the Chico PD. Other officers had come from other departments where shootings had been experienced by them, but nobody in Chico PD had actually shot anybody in the streets while in uniform. Now, that changed rather rapidly with, as I say, of course, the Butte County terrible thing up in Inskip. But furthermore, within a few years of my being here in Chico, we had a pretty serious officer-involved shooting. At any rate, anytime an officer fires a weapon in the line of duty, the consequences might be fatal. And you hope that innocent bystanders won't be hurt and that his or her own safety won't be compromised. The officers are well trained in avoiding involving bystanders as collateral damage in situations, but it is not impossible that it can happen. It's something to be concerned for. Any shooting incident, even a righteous one, can shake you up tremendously. A person who goes through that situation scenario can feel like they're floating in space, feel as though the whole incident is happening to someone else, disengage or distancing from it, watching as another person. This has to do a lot with high stress situations. Your heart rate goes up tremendously. Lieutenant Colonel Grossman talks a lot about high stress situations where the heart rate goes up to as much as 200. People's visions become occluded, like you're looking through a tunnel. Hearing can be occluded or it can be exaggerated. All feeling go out of the extremities, like the fingers hardly can tell what they're touching. And motor control of fine things is lost, while the major motor control, like that which you need for running or fighting, are enhanced, and pain is suppressed. So in that state, high stress situations, you can put a person in a very unusual set of feelings of their body and their minds. And all of these feelings are actually normal in an abnormal situation. An officer may have trouble remembering specific details because of this. And in the midst of an event in which everything happens so fast, it's difficult for their senses to clearly send messages to the brain and for their brain to process all of the information in any organized way. Confusion and memory lapses are not because you've lost your mind. They're perfectly normal. In fact, anybody debriefing an officer after a high stress situation can expect to get a kind of a word salad in part of this stuff. I mentioned Lieutenant Colonel Grossman is a man I've met and trained under for several days on several things. He's written a number of books, but his first book was called On Killing. And it's a fascinating study. I really recommend it. You would think, wow, what a challenging name. I'm a pastor, what have I got this book on my desk on killing? He considers himself the only man who's ever actually taken the job of killology, studying the science of what it is to actually shoot and kill somebody. This is something we ask officers to have to be able to do under certain extreme circumstances. It is something that soldiers are asked to do when they go into the field. And he's had some very interesting insights and brings together a lot of scientific studies as to what this entails. And it's a pretty incredible thing. You may have heard the statistics, but it was something in World War II when they started to study the actual shooting scenarios of real soldiers in the field. And they discovered that only about 10 to maybe 15% of the soldiers who were directly in contact with the enemy across the field and given the job to shoot at the enemy among our soldiers, and this was true of the Germans as well, only about 10 or 15% actually aimed at and tried to kill the enemy. The rest of them, 80, 85%, or 90% of their soldiers shot wide, shot high, made a loud bang, and never pulled the trigger. Most of these men didn't actually try to shoot the enemy. And the reason was they were not conditioned to shoot people. And we have a natural reticence, a reluctance, a strong barrier against killing our own kind. That's true among all the animal species. There's a lot of posturing, a lot of barking, a lot of trying to stand taller, trying to be the alpha dog, but not actual killing of the same species. They'll kill other species more readily. So that's kind of nice to know about human beings. And it takes a conditioning to get somebody over that. They went away from bullseye targets from the World War II era. And in Korea, went to human-shaped silhouette targets with bullseyes superimposed over them. And they raised the kill rate to maybe 50%. Until Vietnam, when they had photorealistic pop-up targets that were timed to cause the soldier in training to acquire, evaluate, fire, or refrain from firing, and do that 1,000 times over until they were conditioned to kill what looked like people across the field. And our Vietnam soldiers started to kill it at the rate of 80% or so of the soldiers. What we did not take into account was the fact that when you bring those guys home, they've broken through that barrier and they are hurt. They've had a moral trauma done to themselves by what they themselves did in obedience, and properly so, for the sake of freedom or whatever. And they came back broken. That's why there was so much addiction and so much brokenness, plus the fact that they were not received well as heroes when they came back. After a shooting incident, the first 3 days after a traumatic incident can be an emotional and mental roller coaster. There can be sleep disturbance, troubled, fitful sleep, body, arm, hand, leg, or foot jerking during the sleep, flashbacks of the event while still awake, physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion, and a depressed appetite, nausea or vomiting. And you can read the list. I'm not going to go through all those, but there are physical expenses to the body and the mind after a shooting incident. It can be like that. It can ultimately result in feelings the department has betrayed you, feeling that fellow officers believe you're falling apart, being irritable with loved ones, short-tempered, feeling unworthy, sexual dysfunction, maybe even aggressive patrol behavior. Now, my first experience with a police-involved shooting in Chico was that a carjacker was in a backyard breaking into a car. 4 Chico police officers responded and surprised the gang member who left his girlfriend there and tried to flee. He hopped the fence, and as he was doing so, he pulled the gun out of his waistband, and running down an alley, he encountered our officer, Tony Ferrara, who called out to him and said, "Police, stop," and instead of doing that, this guy was a gangbanger, and he turned and fired at our officer and shot him through the shoulder, fortunately, just the meaty part of the shoulder. And Tony returned fire, as well as 2 other officers who came up behind and were firing at the guy, and they shot him and killed him. Oddly enough, they could only find out after the fact that the guy only got 1 round off because in pulling the gun out of his belt, he triggered the release mechanism for the magazine, which fell out of the handle and he held up his gun and shot the one round that was in the chamber at Tony and hit the officer. But he did not hit him in a vital place. So the officer is still with our force. He's many years, 20 years later, he's still here, and he's a very fine man. Um, but he was the first Chico PD officer I ever seen get injured in the line of duty like this. Um, and the rest of the guys who were there, the three officers, went into the normal post-shooting protocol. Um, oh yeah, let me back that up. Um, this is how it went. I was called out to the hotel where they were sequestered, these three officers who were not in the hospital. I spent a good part of the night with them. I was their chaplain and I heard their stories. They talked about the incident. I didn't try to pump them or get more information. In fact, it's probably not a great idea to try to debrief them because they're going to have an official debriefing after a number of hours has have passed by. And what happens is their gun and badge, or their gun is taken away from them, not their badge, because they haven't been demoted. They haven't committed a crime. But part of a crime scene is that gun that they fired, and the round that they fired has to be identified with the rounds that are in the deceased, and all of the firing situation has to be reconstructed by the DA and determined to be a clean, proper enforcement of law, which it was. But I got to really get deep with those guys that night, and in fact, all three of them stayed very close friends while they've been with the department, and we had a very special relationship after that intense situation. The next officer involved shooting situation that I had here was a young man. He was maybe 20 years old. Um, had already a long record of violent crimes, and he was in Susanville prison for a time and then released from Susanville in Susanville. He wasn't supposed to come down the hill, but he came down to Chico to sell a gun that he managed to steal. Uh, Somebody had noticed him at the Chico Mall trying to sell this gun, so they reported him to the police, and we got a description of the car. And so an officer who was driving by the Valero station over here on Esplanade, across the street from the Italian Garden or whatever that's called. Um, so more officers were called. They came. They swarmed around this car. They pinned him in on several sides. He wasn't the driver. He was in the back seat, and there were three other kids in the car with him. The officers ordered them to all get out of the car one by one and lie down on the ground. And this guy said, and he told one of his kids, "I'm not going to be taken alive." So he jumped in the front seat and tried to drive the car into the officers. They opened fire into the car, and they shot him down. There were 5 officers involved with that. Well, they were sequestered again in a hotel. I came to the room. I brought them ice cream. Strangely enough, they were all watching this Western movie where there was an awful lot of shooting. I couldn't kind of believe it that they were going to watch this shooting situation scenario, but it was a way for them to get through the situation. And I finally figured out that they were supporting each other enough, and they didn't need me there. One more scenario was a suicide by cop. A 62-year-old man who was drunk and depressed called 911 for suicide threat. He called our dispatch and told them he was going to kill himself. He had a shotgun, and he talked with one of our officers for quite a long time, who kept him on the phone and kept him talking. So he was keeping him here. And then that call ended. Seemed like it might resolve or he'll pass out, but he was on drugs and alcohol at once. And so He called again. The A unit of 4 officers appeared at the apartment. They got everybody in the apartment area cordoned off so that there wouldn't be any damage done to anybody. They called for this guy to come out, called into the apartment. They tried to get him to come out so they could contain him and get him treatment. But his wife had died 2 years before. He had nothing to live for, according to him. And when he came out holding the shotgun. So he swung the shotgun up toward the officers, and there was nothing left to do but to take him down. He was standing at the top of a second-story apartment set of stairs outdoors, and he raised it toward the officers, and he was shot dead. This was hard on the officers who did the shooting, but it was particularly hard for the officer who had been on the line and trying to negotiate with the guy to keep him alive. Suicide by cop is a strange psychological matter where you don't quite have the guts to kill yourself, but you make officers do it to you. That can create an awful lot of strain. Um, then the highly publicized death of a young black male who is a psychopath, just completely broken with all morality, um, and who had actually attacked officers in Sacramento a year before, was going nuts. And he periodically went nuts. I understood he would sit in front of a blank television that wasn't even on and play video games, imagining what he was looking at. So he was that broken with reality. His father called 911 and got the Chico PD dispatch, called for help. First asked for the fire department to come and do a medical on their son. But when the fire department showed up and he threatened them with knives, they backed off and said, no, 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 this is not for us. This is a police matter. So the father ended up calling 3 times and asking for help. He was barricaded in a bedroom with his other younger sons. He said he's going to kill us. Come and help us. The young man, the crazy guy, stayed in the living room. The 2 siblings and the father hid in the bedroom. The father said, "I'll kill him myself if I have to." But the PD entered and tried taser, which didn't work with him, and had to shoot him dead. After that, some people who wanted to turn this into a George Floyd episode, and it was just subsequent to that, tried to get this father to make a lot of complaints about it being racially motivated, which it just wasn't. This kid was nuts, and he himself had called for, death if by no other means to stop this young man's crazy tirade. It was very hard on everybody, and especially the officers the 2 officers who went in and had to do this deed. Threats of potential racial uprising over this matter was handled very well. Our chief of police, Mike O'Brien, at the time, as well as the sheriff, Sheriff Honey, and DA Mike Ramsey, all came together with the NAACP, who sent a group out, and with local black pastor and the fathers, and showed them and played for them the 911 calls and the exchanges that were being done there, and showed how the response of the police department was completely appropriate and necessary in the situation. And this is not going to play well if they try to turn it into a race riot. Thank God it did not happen. Okay, when an officer involved shooting happens, the officers involved are relieved of duty for a period of time. They're put on administrative leave while this investigation goes on. Any police officer who has discharged his or her weapon will have the weapon taken away for investigation. That's a necessary thing. But the very next thing that happens is the officer who takes the gun away gives them another one. Unless they are considered probably guilty of some crime, they get a gun back so that they're not being stripped of their authority and being suspected of something. So that's very symbolic. It's very important. The officer is still in charge of a gun and is fine. If someone was shot, um, the officer will be sequestered in a secret hotel room. The press does not know where that is. When I was called into the sequestered rooms, it was clear to me, made clear to me, I was not to disclose this to anybody outside of the immediate police department. So they're put on administrative leave for a few days, it might be weeks. Sometimes those investigations go on. They are paid for that time that they're off because it's not their fault. They've done their job. There'll be union and legal representatives and administrative personnel, as well as chaplains, having access to the officers, but no one else get in the room while they're sequestered. An official investigation of the shooting will be held by allied agencies to avoid your own agency being accused of favoritism or cover up. So while your initial unit will be doing the containment and helping to get the officer in that first situation that we've described, after that, the investigation is done by, say, another police force or the sheriff's department or someone who can do this independent of your unit so that it's a fair rendering. It's not slanted in favor or against your officers. The district attorney will eventually rule on the shoot that it was in keeping with policy, if it was, or it constituted an error or breach of protocol, or even a crime. Now, possibly all of you, some of you, no doubt, heard of a shooting in Paradise that happened not too long ago, I guess 5 or 6 years maybe. Feaster was the name of the officer of the Paradise Police Department. He was, his favorite occupation was chasing down drunken drivers. And he had found one and was chasing this drunken driver around who apparently had a female person riding with him in the shotgun. And the car got out of control and tipped over and was on its side edge. So with the driver's seat in the up position and the passenger seat in the down position, a fatality of the female was instant with the wreck. Then the officer, is not a good picture, but it's what was put out. The officer then found this guy trying to crawl out of the driver's side window. He had his gun out already, and before he knew it, he'd fired, and he shot the guy in the neck, killing him instantly. He shot only one round. Now, when I first heard of that incident and he'd shot only one round, I went, "Oh my God, it's a bad shoot." If an officer is in a situation where they properly evaluate, it's a necessary there's a necessary shoot condition here. They will do so and they'll empty the clip, or they'll at least fire off 8 or 10 rounds because they want to subdue. Once you're committed to shooting somebody, you're committed to killing them because the idea is to stop the threat. So that's normal for the officers when they empty their gun. People will say it's overkill, but it's what they do. If they're up to the point of shooting somebody, they're up to the point of killing them. And but here's an officer who fired off one. So I'm saying that was a goof. He had his finger on the trigger. He was over anxious to do this, and he shot. And it was ultimately judged a bad shoot. He lost his job and his occupation through it. But this is a picture of it actually from the dash cam. The officer shooting that guy coming out of his car. Any questions? Welcome, Ken. Good to see
Sorry,
you.
I'm late.
It's all right. You'll have the video. It's okay. Good to have you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Oh, we're talking about police-involved shootings. Now, returning to duty. Once the officer is cleared, the department will decide when he is to come back online. It's interesting. but returning to duty can be traumatic. Symptoms that have begun to abate may suddenly increase. We talked about the symptoms of having all these kind of nervous situations. Panic reactions to objects or places that remind you of the incident can be common. Intense fear, nausea, heart pounding, headaches, flashbacks, or other symptoms may occur. And when I say you, I'm talking about the cop. When you think about it, see or get close to the weapon, your uniform, entrance to the station, the scene of the shooting incident, or other symbols of the event. In our first lesson in this series of courses, I've talked about a little bit, but I didn't talk much about the fact that part of the slow disassembling of a police officer who enters for altruistic reasons and ends up kind of falling apart towards the end. The city you work in, if you work in it long enough, has streets up and down, and every street has cross streets, and every cross streets have some houses in them. And going through all those areas of town, you remember the incidents that you answered in every single one of those. Here was a killing. Here was a guy who was found dead. Here was a place where that girl got run over. It's all bad events. It's all terrifically traumatic situations. And your roadmap of that city is a little like the crime maps we'll see occasionally on our neighborhoods and see where those happen, except it's a lot more filled with dots, and they're terrible dots. And so the real memory of a real map can be filled with real events that happened in your course of your career, and you see all these things. And of course, just one side of town where you had to kill somebody is going to kind of be radioactive for you. And we can expect that to happen with the officers. Comments and behaviors of fellow officers can adversely affect the officer who's in post-trauma. It's really important to say the right thing. I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, I mentioned the first shooting incident that I was involved in, where the carjacker had ejected the magazine, but he did shoot one of our officers. One of the officers that came up from behind of this guy and shot into him was Eric McManus. He was a good guy. He's a friend on the force. And he was all military and tough and talk tough. And, all that does is cover up a soft heart. And Eric, I really love the guy. And I found out that after that evening of being sequestered and being clear of the good shoot, he was going to be coming back onto the force for a graveyard shift. And so I offered myself to go ride with him that evening. We went out, and within a half hour of our starting out on the route, we went into the Starbucks downtown at 3rd and Broadway, and went up to the gal and ordered our coffees and so forth. And she's looking at us in our uniforms. And so she looks at Eric and she says, "So, did you ever have to shoot anybody?" And he looks over at me and doesn't answer and walks away from her. And I walked up to her and said, "Actually, he did have to shoot somebody a couple of weeks ago. And it's not what they like to do. It's a necessary thing, and it hurts them. So it's not the thing to ask an officer." She said, "Oh, I'm sorry." I said, "I'm sure you are, but it's a good moment to learn that fact that it's an uncommonly awful and uncomfortable thing that he had to do to protect us all. And so you don't ask them that." So we get back in the car with our coffees, and we get called to a highway stop that's out on the just out of town. And one of our officers was following and chasing a guy in a small cabin or a truck with a sort of a camper shell on the back. So a very bad visibility as to what is happening in the car. She had him stop. Finally, she said this guy wasn't stopping. He was continuing to go on. He's not cooperating. So she had him with gun drawn on him, and was ordering him to stay in the car until we got there. Then when we got there, she said, "Come out and show your hands and keep your hands high and stand still." And instead of standing still, the guy is slowly dropping his hands. He's walking toward the officers. They both had their guns drawn. And the guy was sassing him back and saying, I'm a good guy. I'm a law-abiding citizen. What's wrong with you guys? You got your guns drawn. What are you trying to do? You trying to kill me? Why don't you shoot? Why don't you shoot me? You know, and later I told Abigail wasn't very nice to the guy after that. He definitely got cuffed and taken in. But I said, Eric, there's just shooting in the wind tonight, man. Everybody wants to ask you about shooting them. He says, no kidding. And I said, well, I'm glad I'm with you tonight because this was our night. Performance after trauma. Involvement in a traumatic shooting will have long-term effects. They may have to recount the incident. In fact, they will have to recount the incident. You may have occasional flashbacks. You have to deal with victims every day. Don't join the victims by ignoring your feelings. Acknowledge your emotions, let yourself feel them and accept them that they are normal. Now, what we don't say to an officer who's been involved in a police shooting, police officer involved shooting. Officer involved, it means that the officer's not shot, but he was a shooter. When an officer has been in a shooting incident, some things not to say, terms such as killer. Oh, for gosh sakes, you guys wouldn't do that. Don't congratulate him. Don't pat him on the back and say, good going, you did that good. Don't ask for repeated accounts either. Tell me what happened. You don't do that. And of course, you don't suggest throwing a few back. If the officer is not on duty, don't call his house to relay gossip or tell him about other incidents. He needs to be left alone. Don't poke him in the chest or touch him in any aggressive ways. And if injured, don't send his wife flowers. If injured, you don't send anything that suggests a funeral. Okay. What you do say is, this is number one. This is what you always will say. I'm so glad you came out okay. I'm glad you're okay. It's important to be okay. You're not doing an evaluation on the shoot that it's a great shoot. That was a clean shoot. You don't know. You don't know what's left to be disclosed with this. You're not the judge of that. You're the chaplain. What you are is glad that you're not hurt. Or if you got hurt, I'm glad it wasn't any worse than that. I'm glad you're going to be all right. You can ask how you're doing. You can say, is there anything I can do for you? You don't patronize, you don't give advice or try to counsel. That's not our role. We don't get in the middle of what's an investigation and an evaluation of the officer's behaviors. You don't try to debrief the officer on the event. If he wants to recount the shooting, you can permit that and receive it well, but without any judgment, without any making any call. An official determination is coming, which will hopefully vindicate him or her. You just want to show them you care. Okay. Now, we've all heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's important to know a couple of things about this. Actual PTSD requires 6 months of trauma response that is not getting any better. After that, it's considered a disorder. But before that, it's just caused post-traumatic stress because it's really normal. It hasn't created a disorder, it's just created stress. So it's good to understand when that line is crossed. PTSD occurs after a traumatic event. A traumatic event is something terrible and scary that you see or hear about or that happens to you, such as combat exposure, child sexual or physical abuse, terrorist attack, sexual or physical assault, serious accidents, or natural disasters. As chaplains, we are not professional counselors who are empowered to treat long-term effects of trauma in the officers that we serve. Most officers will suffer some degree of this disorder in their careers. It's just normal to be disordered by what they go through. The DSM-5, that's the current level of the big book of crazy, defines the disorder as a persistent irrational fear and reaction that disrupts one's life even after 6 months from the incident. So as I said, the 6-month line is where you start drawing it. Critical incident response. At the scene, we are to show concern and understanding, give mental and physical first aid as much as is needed. We don't offer opinions. 2, provide a psychological break by getting the officer away from the body or some distance from the scene. Now, that's not our authority, but if it's possible to redirect the officer to some more neutral place, then we help doing that. The officer should be with supportive friend or supervisor. This break should be of a non-stimulating nature. That's no drinks with caffeine. The officer is already jacked up, so we don't need to get him more jacked up. If it's our role, we can explain what administrative procedures will occur during the next few hours and why. That's usually something for the police to do. This will help the officer realize that the investigation of the incident is SOP, it's standard operating procedure. It's not a witch hunt, and he's not being accused of anything, certainly not yet. The gun is taken as evidence, so it must be replaced immediately. This guideline can be modified depending on the circumstances, of course, and the officer's level of stress. 5, the officer will retain an attorney via the POA, the Police Officers Association or Union, to safeguard his or her personal interests. There will be an attorney always involved here, simply to go through the legal ramifications of things to happen. Even when the county determines that it was a righteous shoot, as is the term, there can be civil lawsuits, wrongful death lawsuits that can come against an officer and a department and a city, even after the fact. So legal defense is important. 6, before undergoing a detailed interview, the officer should have some recovery time in a secure setting where he is insulated from the press and curious officers. So as I said, when they're sequestered, we're not looking to pump them for information. There's a science behind debriefings, and it really should be done once officially and recorded, and done very carefully by somebody who's a trained professional in debriefings, so that the first go round will be the closest to what really happened or what's really in the valid memory. Memories tend to do this job of filling in the blanks when there are blanks. And so you don't want to give too many opportunities for that blank to get filled in, because that becomes the new memory and it's not helpful. 7, totally isolating the officer breeds feelings of alienation, so you don't leave them alone. The officer, that's why a chaplain is helpful too sometimes, because the more official cop apparatus has to come and go to the hotel, but you can stay with them, and then they've got somebody there supporting them, a peer or possibly a peer who's been through similar experiences. As I said, to avoid legal complications, that incident shouldn't be discussed prior to the preliminary investigation. It's crucial to show the officer concern and support. No judgment, good or bad, is offered regarding the shooting. The message is, again, I'm so glad you're okay. You're very important to me. That was rough. You don't say the SOB was asking for it, or any words to that effect, please. Okay. 8, if the officer is not injured, that officer or department contacts the family via phone call or personal visit and lets them know what happened before they hear rumors and receive phone calls from others or see it on Facebook. If the officer is injured, a department member of the family knows, should pick the family up and drive them to the hospital. You make sure the family has support, like a friend and the chaplain. So if the officer is in the hospital, it's good to get a chaplain there. So at a shooting situation like we had the first time, this, I believe, did happen, but the department should dispatch a chaplain to the sequestered officers and another officer to the hospital where the injured officer is being treated. 9, supportive face-to-face communications with a high-ranking administrator goes a long way toward alleviating fear of departmental reaction. The captain, chief, whoever is the sheriff, whoever is the head of your unit should go to that officer in sequester and say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that for you. We appreciate you going with the program here. This is happening. We're here for you. If you need anything at all, we want to know. Is there anything you want now? We're going to help you out. And while not judging the situation, because it can't be judged prior to the investigation, the administrator shows support, and that's important. These administrators are often reluctant to say anything for fear that their comments can be misconstrued as an endorsement of the action of the officer ahead of time. That administrator doesn't have to comment on the incident. What's important is to show concern and empathy for the officer. Again, their role is to say, I'm so glad you're okay. The officer will be given administrative leave to deal with the emotional impact and to be out of service while the investigation is going on. It's best to avoid the officer going back to work prior to the resolution of the shooting, keeping the officer off the street until the shooting is resolved, for example. After the investigation, grand jury, coroner inquest, DA statement, and so forth. I've been to several of these DA statements, which is in front of the press and public interests. And our district attorney here, Mike Ramsey, is a friend of mine, has done a very excellent job in these debriefings. He reconstructs the scene. He has photographs and charts and measurements and identifications, and he's using very important language that's always very neutral and correct. And he shows the rightness of his call, that it's a good shoot. Now, other officers at the scene of the shooting should be screened for their emotional reactions and given the rest of the shift off or leave as necessary, case by case basis. Supervisors, after a little training, can conduct such a screening themselves. Okay. 11, for the officers who fired a weapon, there should be a mandatory confidential debriefing with a chaplain prior to returning to duty. That's not right after the incident, but sometime in the middle, just to see how they're doing as people. The debriefing should take place as soon after the shooting as is practical, but as again, after the call has been made as to whether it's a good shoot or whatever. Everyone at the scene, including the dispatcher, should have a debriefing with the chaplain, which can be done in a group within 72 hours. Follow-up sessions for other personnel may be appropriate. This is kind of along the same line as those protocols where we had critical incidents and debriefing, which means just talking through it and showing them that you care. I think I mentioned the one suicide that was called into one of our dispatchers, and she kept the guy with her all up until the time that the police showed up, and then she heard the gun go off and he killed himself. She was feeling she failed, but I was able to be called in by her supervisor and with her listen to the recording of the 911 phone call. And in my estimation, man, she did a tremendously good job. She did everything anybody could be conceived of needing to do. So I just told her that. I can't imagine you doing any more than that. You couldn't do more. It was not successful, if success is measured by keeping him alive through the incident. But he was going to kill himself no matter what happened, and you couldn't have changed the outcome. But you did such a great job. Please be comfortable with that. So that's kind of how that goes. Peer support team members, officers previously involved in similar situations with special training, are an asset in assisting group debriefings and providing follow-up support. I know that there's a peer support group with the Chico PD, not necessarily tasked towards shooting incidents, but just anything. And they are there for our officers who just need to get through a rough spot in their lives. And it's something that chaplains can be involved with when they call us in. It's a good service. 12, the opportunity for family counseling, spouse, children, significant other should be made available. That's not our call, but we can encourage the department to have that available for our officers. Officers' phone numbers are never published, but it may be advisable to have a friend or family member or telephone answering service or machine screen the phone calls so that raw calls don't come in from anyplace else, especially somebody who wants to accuse the officer of being a murderer. An administrator or supervisor should tell the rest of the department or shift what happened so that the officer does not get bombarded with questions and rumors are then held in check. So we don't make the officer have to recount the story to everybody he sees down the hallway. Give it all at once from a dependable source, and you leave it there. 15, expedite the completion of administrative and criminal investigations and advisement of the outcomes of the officer. So yeah, that's got to be a high level and important thing to go through. I've heard of departments that left their officer in that limbo for a year. And I cannot imagine more damage being done to a fine officer, except that there's something political involved with it. God, you can never do that. You got to get it through this situation. You want to do a careful job, but it's got to be a quick job so that the officer comes out of that limbo and knows that he or she was considered to do the right thing. Now consider the officer's interest in media releases. A chaplain will never talk to the media, never. So that's never your job, but we can know about it. 17, allow a paced return to duty, like riding with a fellow officer first day or two, or working on a different beat or shift if that's desired. And chaplains, as I did with Eric McManus, schedule and ask for a ride along with the officer when he returns to patrol. It's a good thing. Okay, any questions from anybody? Guys, it's your turn. You're all shaking your head. Okay. Take 5 minutes and we'll come back at 2 o'clock or, well, yeah, maybe before 2 o'clock. Take 5 minutes and go to the bathroom or get yourself a drink or something. And I will call you back in. We'll get the second one done. Good job. I'm going to switch the screen to our share screen again and go here. Okay, suicides and police suicide prevention. We're going to talk a little about a couple of things in this, but again, feel free to answer because there's going to be some questions if you have some answers or you got something. This doesn't take an hour and a half to go through, so you can stop and throw a question in if you wish. So what is suicide? Is it self-murder? Is a suicide a victim of depression? The ultimate rejection of the self? The highest form of selfishness? Aggression toward the self worked against everyone who is left after the suicide has departed. Suicide's complicated. Chaplains must deal with suicides. There are signs in all potential suicides, if anyone is listening and interpreting well. How many times have you heard it and then didn't recognize it until after the suicide has taken place? Crisis requires truth. When a person is in a suicidal crisis, they need truth and they may seek help. We are there to give them hope and a hand out of the mental predicament that they are in if we can find out that we got somebody like that. Our attitudes about suicide, religious workers have many different views on suicides. It's a sign of mental illness, spiritual sickness, hopelessness, etc. Is it not? Possibly. Does it spell damnation for a lost soul? Or do we really know? Suicides are uncomfortable. because it's all wound up in one guy and one death. We're going to see it. As chaplains, we will see more suicides than other ministers ever will. We ought to have some idea about what is happening. Now, discussion. Who among you has dealt with suicides before? I know I have several. Yeah. Okay.
I have.
And how about threats of suicide that didn't come off? Yeah. As you may know,
About 3 weeks ago.
no kidding. Okay. Came out okay?
Came out good. We got to him before he did anything.
Well, many more times women threaten suicide and don't end up doing it actually, or will do it in such a way that they survive it. Guys don't threaten it too often, but when they attempt it, they usually are successful because they'll use a more violent means to off themselves, like a gun. A woman might use pills, but a guy using a gun is more likely to not survive the incident. Now, common misconceptions. Are these things true or false? People who talk about suicide rarely commit suicide. True or false?
False.
Good. The tendency towards suicide is inherited and passed on from one generation to another. It can be true. What becomes normalized in a family can sometimes go down through generations because it's suddenly the unthinkable is thinkable, and somebody close to you has opened that door. It can happen. That doesn't mean it's inherited like a gene, but it can be inherited in the sense of a family pattern of dealing with trouble. The suicidal person wants to die and feels there is no turning back. True or false?
False.
Good. Everyone who commits suicide is depressed. True or false?
False.
It's certainly true that many are, but there's a lot of different reasons. More true or false? There is very little correlation between alcoholism and suicide. Everybody says false. There's a lot of correlation. A person who commits suicide is mentally ill. True or false? Not necessarily
Could
at
be
all.
or it could not be.
Yeah, it could be and could not be correctly. The word is in there was not modified, so we have to say false. A suicide attempt means that the attempter will always entertain suicide. True or false?
False.
False is right. If you ask a client directly, do you feel like killing yourself? This will lead him to make a suicide attempt. True or false?
False.
Definitely false. We get afraid of talking about it because we think we're going to put the idea in their minds. That's really not true. Suicide is more common among lower socioeconomic groups than anywhere else in our society. Is that true or false? The poor, in other words.
I'd say false.
That's correct. Suicidal persons rarely seek medical help. No, I don't think you can say that rightly either. Myths and facts. Yes, what were you going to say? Okay. People who talk about suicide rarely commit suicides within 6 months of preceding the suicide. I don't even know what that question means. Fact. The talk of suicide may be a clue or a warning. Take threats seriously. That's the answer. Suicidal person really wants to die? No. Most suicidal people are ambivalent and want help. Very often, when the crisis has been met, the suicide attempts stop. Myth: once someone attempts suicide, they will always be suicidal. No, new ways of coping with stress can be learned, and such. Just reading a thing from Joe. Okay. asking directly about suicide could encourage an attempt. No, actually, asking directly can minimize anxiety and act as a deterrent. It can also be showing this person that there's a bridge to somebody feeling more normal who could actually help them out of the situation. If the person who tries to kill him or herself is just plain crazy. No, an attempter is often upset or depressed, but not mentally ill. Okay. Now, this is a good chart to study, and there's a chart of this kind in your written information. There is a progression in suicidality, and you can see the kind of graph across the top from 0 to 1 or 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 and 8 and 10. Okay, you ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself? This can be very releasing or helpful to the person, because they can finally talk about it. If you're thinking about killing yourself, you don't want it. You feel you can't talk to anybody about it. They'll think I'm crazy. They'll jump on me. They'll do bad things to me. But here's somebody calm and loving and just considerate and saying, are you thinking of killing yourself? And he's not going mad. He's not angry at me. And I say, yeah, I kind of am. And now I've got somebody to talk to about it. It's actually a lifeline. And so if they say, yeah, that's that number one up there to talk, there's talk about it. So how do you want to do it? Do you know how you're going to do it? And then do you have the means to do it? How is that so? Is it available now? Very important. So you see how you're moving across the graph toward actually accomplishing it. The talk turns into thought of the means and the availability of those means to do it. And now we're talking around 3 or 4 and so forth. Then you look and say, well, do you have a place in mind where you're going to do this? Yeah, I'm going to check into this motel out on Highway 32. Okay, so now we're up to where, and that's 6 or 7. And do you have a time frame in which you mean to do this? No, not yet. I've just been thinking about it. Or yes, next, tonight I'm going to do this. When you get that far up the scale of ideality, the suicidality, it's time to call for help. That's a 911 call. We aren't there to provide the entire service. This is a 5150. Somebody's thinking of hurting themselves. I've called 5150s out on people before, and quite appropriately. So if self-harm is actually happening or being intended by the reasonable talk, then we call in for help. You look for information to show a desire to live. You look for self-revealing techniques. I don't know what's happening. I'm confused. Keep them in the right now, today. We don't get on in the vague past. We don't go into the vague future. It's between you and them. Be aware of where you are. Be warm, be direct, be confrontative, and be truthful in talking to a person who's considering suicide. And in the ministry, we all have the potential of getting into one of these conversations. I've had a member of my church kill themselves, and it's no fun after the fact and realize, I was being told that she was thinking of this, and I really wasn't hearing it. We don't want to think, it's the unthinkable, and we don't want to think about it. So, lethality assessment scale for suicide potential. How likely is this person to be dead in 2 hours? So, how likely? A 1 to 9 scale. If there's 1 and there's no chance of suicide in the next 2 hours, they can survive. The lethality level has not been reached. And 9 would be along that sliding scale. There's no way they're going to survive this, the high lethality, without intervention. We're going to lose this person. So we can use that kind of a scale as well to consider. Now, on the lethality scaling of statistics, age and sex Males accomplish suicide the most often, while females attempt suicide the most often. Males 60 years of age are the most at risk on the lethality scale of either genders or age groups. They are guys who've gotten past their professional careers. Maybe their marriages are busted up. Uh, Life hasn't turned out the way they liked, and they're probably hooked to alcohol and or drugs. So they're in trouble. Young males may also be at high risk because of risky behavior and failings in life, and they don't have the emotional regulation to be able to realize that life is going to straighten itself out or get better if they just hang on there. But everything is ultimate. I remember the first suicide I had anything to do with was a good friend of mine had an older brother who hung himself by a garden hose from the garage rafters because he broke up with his girlfriend. Oh my God, the guy's 16 and he killed himself over a girl. You think later in life, you're going to get through that kind of a crisis. But at 16, it was the whole world for him. Now, race and also socioeconomic status is not a critical factor in this. There are people from every walk of life and every racial group who commit suicide. And there's not a tendency in any of these to be more or less. At the onset of self-destructive behavior, we may ask, is this the first time they felt suicidal tendencies, or is it a multiple time event? If it's the first time, it may be lower in lethality. It's going to be something they're thinking about, but they get past it. If they think about it many times, that raises the lethality, the likeliness of an attempt. We ask the method, how is it available? Pills are available, and as I said, most often that's used by women. It's a lower likelihood of outcome, and it's less violent. Gun obviously is a high likelihood of outcome of death, and it is a violent means. Jumping to a high and violent. There are people who jump from the outlook going up into paradise, and people die that way. I had a friend die jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, and lethality scaling. Now, they may have suffered major losses, and that's in their perspective, not ours necessarily, but for them, it's the end of the world. Medical systems. What is the last straw? A medical, psychological depression. What's causing this person trouble? Is it medical? Resources. What are they? Have they worn out all their resources? Some people wear out their family, their job, the law enforcement, and everybody, and medical. They get everybody mad at them because they are always crying wolf or whatever. But if they're out of resources, they can get to the end of their tether and use suicide as the answer. We judge the degree of communication. Is it high quality? In isolation, if they can't communicate, it raises the lethality. They can't connect with people. They can't talk. The kinds of feelings expressed. Holding it all in causes a high lethality. They can't connect with people. Discussing their feelings lowers the bar and makes it less likely to be a lethal situation. Are they rejected, sloughed off by previous people who dealt with their attempts? So now they're out of resources. Do they wear out the people who are around them, as I said? Further on the lethality scaling, personality status. Does he feel worth anything? Does he have any family status? A high lethality would be safekeeping, psychological evaluation, and observation. Okay, so what I'm saying in that is, if we see that somebody is 5150, and we put them into safekeeping. In other words, they're in lockdown in the psych ward. They get evaluation of observation. They come out and they're mad at you for locking them up. You can apologize tomorrow, but you kept them safe overnight. And that looked really clear to you that we're talking trouble. In a moderate lethal situation, you can work on their ambivalence about living, their mixed or conflicting feelings. You have time to talk with them. They're not doing it right away. In a low lethality situation, they're just kind of talking and kicking around. You can do a basic assessment, but there's time to work with it. It's very often important to make a contract with people who have said they're thinking about suicide. Before I meet with you again tomorrow, will you promise me not to do anything about this in the next 24 hours unless you contact me first? Will you promise me that? That's a lifeline. It can set up a situation where they feel obligated, socially obligated, to contact you if they are in a crisis in the next 24 hours. So you don't set it out too far because it loses its force. But when somebody is in a crisis mode of suicide, it usually doesn't last more than a couple of days. Uh, so you force a decision on a time to meet and you say, promise me, let's have a contract on this. You're not going to harm yourself unless you first contacted me and give me a chance to get to you. Okay. All right.
Hey, Peter,
Yes, sir.
when I was in seminary, I worked for the Marin County Suicide Prevention Hotline.
Yeah.
And yeah, one of the most important things we did was we made an appointment with them to talk to them the next day.
So exactly the same thing. Right.
Yeah, that worked out really well. I had one guy who was going to shoot himself, and I had him. He actually gave me his gun, and never asked for it back. So that was another situation. Yeah.
Very good. That's very good. Now we as chaplains we will be called out to 1144s, which means dead body. Reason for death is under investigation. You can see right away that they're a suicide. We'll be told it's a suicide or an apparent suicide. They have to investigate that. So we go out to situations where people around this suicide are very emotionally beat up. They're in trouble because what does the suicide say about them or their loved ones? And what can we say? When I go out and contact people in this situation, I take them aside when it's appropriate. And I say, now I want you to understand something. You're going to feel angry. You're going to feel sad. You're going to feel, you want to blame this guy. You want to hug him and make him know he's loved. And it's all not available to you because the victim is also the perpetrator, and it's all mixed up together. And there's questions that will never be answered, and they made that happen to you. Now, I'm going to allow you to have any emotional reaction you want to have because it's all appropriate. It's very confusing, and it's not your fault. It's okay to have an emotional reaction to what just happened because it isn't fair, and they didn't leave you time to help them out, and that's not okay. So react any way you want to. Tell them that being angry and sad at the same time are very realistic because, again, the killer is the one who was killed. Questions will never be answered. That's some of the really most horrid thing that suicide causes is that I want to know, what was wrong. I want to know if I did anything to bring this on. If I failed to do the key thing at the right time, you're never going to get an answer to those questions. And it's just beating yourself up. So it's better to allow that it can't be answered. Now, how can chaplains help? We can be a buffer between the survivors and the police. When we go out on 1144, anytime, the bodies of the dead are usually kept in a bedroom or someplace where they're secure. And although there won't be necessary crime tape around, the family or roommates or neighbors are not allowed in unless, and at such a time as the cops say, okay, you can come in and then you, as a chaplain, can bring them in and pray over the body and do what maybe spiritual work that you feel is asked for as is appropriate. But you only do that as the cops allow it, because they've got to keep that area clear of any interference if there's something to find. So these people are shut out of the room and shut out of the action. So the chaplain spends time with them outside on the couch, in the kitchen, outdoors, and just talk. And we can talk about what happens, what goes on next. The sheriffs will be coming, and the sheriff is the coroner, and they'll be looking for any of the pharmaceuticals this person may have had, and they have to take all that away. They are ultimately going to have control of what happens with the body, and they'll call for the funeral home to come and remove the body, and I'll be here for that. So you can talk to the survivors and give them that stuff. But as I said, one of the keys I find giving to a suicide survivor is the right to be feeling anything they want to, anything that comes to them. It's okay. We can assist the survivors to get the facts of whatever it is. The support group, there are suicide survivor support groups here in Butte County who are very, very helpful. Some people need to get together with folks who've been through the same experience and to meet with them monthly and do debriefing with each other and talk about what they've gone through, and that helps them. Finalization process is coming to closure on the initial facts that their loved one is dead, and nothing is going to bring them back. Yeah, if you can't improve on silence, then don't. And we bring ourselves, we bring hope, we bring honesty, we bring a caring attitude. We are available. If wanted, they can receive touch from us and patience, an arm around the shoulder, a hand on the knee if that's right. Anyway, we listen, we establish a relationship, and we also obtain information. Sometimes what the chaplain can hear from the family or crowd around can be very helpful to the police in winding up their investigation. We can identify and clarify the problem and talk about it. We can share hope, provide an extended family for them, and talk about suicide itself. It's an embarrassing situation. Suicide is embarrassing. We can speak slowly and softly and be calm. We can take our time with them, and the time that we give them, they'll see as very valuable to them. We also need to know our limits. There are some things we don't know, and we just got to say, I don't know. We may have to clarify a concept of what death is and reassure in some positive way, but not patronizing or made up fantasy way. We answer real questions.
Peter,
Yes, sir.
a question. What do you mean by clarify on death? What does that mean?
Okay, let's see.
Clarify the
Concept of death. Okay. We may first of all have to find out from the person what their idea of life and death means. You know, we're going to be talking to people who may or may not be of a religious bent, and we'll need to find out where they're coming from. There are absolute atheists who think you die and go to nowhere. Others have the idea that everybody who dies goes to God, and we may disagree with those kind of extreme views, but we're going to clarify with them what they're thinking about has just happened and what's happening now to the deceased. So if it seems appropriate, and if they seem to be hungry to find out what we know, then we can clarify that as well, but only if that seems welcome to them. It's not an opportunity to impose our views. That's a good question, because I don't have that very clearly described there. Thanks, Danny. Now, what not to do. Don't promote guilt. Guilt is not what's happening here. Sure, in every suicide, there may have been something that could have been done if with tremendous prescience you happen to know this guy is going to kill himself, but we don't know that, and we don't act like everybody's about to kill themselves, so we don't run around making that an issue. So we aren't guilty. Don't physically reveal the weapon to anybody who's surviving. Don't promise confidentiality. I wouldn't get into that kind of conversation necessarily unless you really know your ground, because there could be something criminal that has to be overturned there. And we don't, of course, argue. Don't give choices that we can't make happen. Don't make promises we can't keep, is what I mean there. Don't leave the subject alone. Don't get over involved either. We could try to promise and do things and make everything nice, and that isn't necessarily our role either. It's a kind of neutral, and do not be shocked by anything that isn't shocking. Now, I want to deal here with one suicide that I attended here in Chico that was a particularly sad one, and it touched me greatly. A father who was divorced and his girlfriend went on a skiing weekend, leaving their two sons alone in an apartment. They were teenagers; they could handle their being alone. It was not that was the problem. But the older one, who was like 16 or 17, and the younger 14, each spent most of their days in their respective rooms in the house. And they were both into video games and laptop computers, and they're pretty much with headphones on. So the older one was playing violent video games the whole time, did not know a thing had happened. The father gets home, goes into to the bedroom of the younger son, and finds he's blown his brains out with his dad's own gun. And and there's a connection there on the computer to a cousin in another city who had been having kind of issues over his sexuality. He was thinking, maybe I'm a homosexual. Apparently this 14-year-old had been considering that he may be gay. And so somehow this kid got it in his mind he had to kill himself. So being all alone and his brother shut up in his room, he just got the father's gun and went in his bedroom and shot his brains out. Terrible situation. And I did a lot of on-site counseling, sat down with the father, talked outside with some of the relatives, aunt and uncle and so forth. And we kind of combed through the whole situation, and it was a very good ministry. And I felt I'd done a good job with them and got them through that. Well, the next day in the Enterprise Record, somebody had put an editorial on the editorial page about the death of this kid and the suicide. And he blamed all Christians in the area for having hounded this kid and given him such a hard time because he's gay. And then they sort of drove him to it, and putting guilt for his sexual orientation drove him to suicide. Now, I had no idea that there was a Christian contingent of people harboring ill will towards this kid. But what I particularly objected to, and here's this family's grief, here's the suicide the very next day showing up in the newspaper. It's a private tragedy, it has nothing to do with the public. And it was only for this guy's self-aggrandizement, his use of this kid's death to press a societal issue and try to point fingers at people and blame everybody else. But he outs the kid, and the family along with it, because they're the only ones left. And now we've got this entire messy knot of a situation thrown open to the public with without anybody around to be able to refute it. And I thought, A, I hate the guy who wrote this article, but B, I probably hate more the newspaper that printed this thing irresponsibly, to the shame and exposure of a poor family in grief. I was really upset that showed up in the newspaper. But, and I had, and I was connected to this, and I was with the family, and they never said anything about how he's being hounded by anybody. They weren't concerned that there were Christians who were concerned about this kid's sexuality, or even that his sexuality really had reached a point of a decision. I don't know any of that stuff, but here's these people. Here's this guy who rags this on the newspaper. That's why we as chaplains don't go to the news as chaplains. All right, worst thing that can happen in the police department is a suicide of cop. It's the most terrible thing, a particularly tragic result of cop life. And when I say that the cop deaths by suicide are more frequent than other causes all put together, that's what I'm told. But there is a particularly hard thing about gathering data on this because police do not want to keep this record. They don't like it to be true. They don't want it to be true. So although they have every single fine number LODD death in the field, and every year celebrate and recognize those who've lost their lives to policing, they don't talk about the numbers of suicides. It's an act of killing oneself intentionally. An act infers that there is forethought, planning, and may indicate that prevention may be possible. If we consider the numbers, the national rate of suicides in general population is almost a constant, about 30,000 suicides total in our country annually, about 83 a day, 12 out of every 100,000 people. The national rate of suicide for law enforcement officers from 1980 to the present, the suicide rates have been 2 or 3 times greater than the general population. Before 1980, statistics weren't kept accurately. They were hidden. They were locked away. The cops, we must understand, are warriors. Suicide is what seems to be a viable option for today's warriors who have problems. Qualities of good law enforcement officers, and I'm going to be giving you as our final class, a class on cop psychology, so we're going to go more into that. Their vulnerabilities, they are control freaks. They tend to be cynical. They are subject to peer pressure and self-pressure and needing to always be right, maybe even OCD tendencies, and they all are risk takers. Many strengths can become their vulnerabilities when they're having a trouble. Now, the average law enforcement officer is above average intelligence, say about an IQ of 110. They're have good physical conditioning. They're highly motivated. They're goal oriented, and they're action oriented. They're quick problem solvers, and they like excitement, and they get bored easily. And they tend to take a narrow perspective of people, especially people doing things wrong. So they can be controlling and black and white thinking, right and wrong, no shades of gray. The emotional shield is a psychological mechanism that officers develop over a year and a half years of service, of rolling up to bad scenes to do the good job. They put up the psychological shield, and they don't get caught up in the emotional difficulties of the situation. I don't say that's a perfect mechanism, but it's what they tend to try to do. So they can go on autopilot in all situations, a kind of a blast door that does not give way. It impedes family life, and it can impede any kind of self-help because they get kind of guarded, extra guarded. They can put on psychological blinders. It is sometimes, of course, necessary to screen out distractions of potential, but not imminent dangers while they're doing their jobs. Okay, cops' coping style is problem-focused. Problem-focused means that the ability to identify their problem, its variables and outcomes, and to create a plan to fix it, initiate the plan, and end the problem. So that's it. You go in to solve the problem and end the problem. Emotional focused coping is an ability to deal with the painful emotions when you can't fix the problem. Cops tend to be weak in this skill, may try to fix emotional problems with their problem-focused coping skills. So emotional focused coping is not a strength in cops. Tends to be not. They want to have a physical action oriented way to fix anything. Their key risk factors can be in depression, in marital relationship problems, in excessive alcohol use, in serious internal affairs investigations, looking into their matters and threatening to take their jobs. Key signs of possible suicide is direct or veiled suicidal talk, a history of previous attempts, reckless and impulsive behaviors on the road, and a changed personality or behavior. The major variables are in loss of control and shame, and an inability to fix it and shame, hopelessness and shame, and inability to deal with the emotional pain. Shame is different than guilt, as you probably all know. Guilt says I did something wrong. I took the wrong action here. I'm sorry for it. I want to fix it. I want to get it behind me. Shame says you are wrong. I am wrong. I'm a bad cop. I'm a bad guy. And there's nothing I can do about that because it's who I am. I'm a bad guy. And there's no fix for that. Put it all together. The cop may need to regain control and end his emotional pain, his sense of powerlessness, by taking direct action, by problem solving, and taking the problem solving approach. And unfortunately, in some cases, it leads to suicide. There are 3 suicidal motives: one to stop the pain and take control, one is a solution for the problem, and one to express hostility. What I think I may say in the other courses is that cops are there to take out the bad guy. And when the bad guy is himself, well, then he eats his gun. Interdiction. We deal with the issues matter-of-factly. We use terms if we're in a situation where we can talk to a cop. This is going to be rarely anybody here's job, but if it happens that we're up on that, great. You use terms like suicide, death, hurting yourself, killing yourself. You discuss the problems and you plan the alternatives. We ask, are you thinking of killing yourself? If yes, how are you thinking of killing yourself? We talked about this. Do you have the means? Where would you do it? And when are you going to do it? That's that scale from 0 to 10. Suicidal statements should all be taken seriously. Suicide starts and ends in isolation. Talk about it with themselves. Talk about it with them and save their lives. You all saw, of course, this horrible Maine shooting. This guy killed all those people in Maine, and he was himself a shooting instructor, so he was very capable and able to do a lot of damage. But as so often happens, you hear after the fact, there were some clear signs of this guy going off prior to his event. We all look back on those situations and we wish the heck somebody had said, you know what, this guy's off his beans. Let's get him some help. Somebody got to talk to him. And I wish there was a way to be able to gauge it. Maybe it's got to be something like Minority Report. I don't know how many of you guys saw that movie. Of course, that was a crazy movie, but where these 3 individuals had this special psychical power to be able to predict a murder and tell when it was going to happen and by whom, and show pictures of it ahead of time. Anyway, so if God forbid there's a suicide in the department, understand this, that a police suicide is like a large bomb going off in the station, and it's going to take out whoever's close to it. Issues of anger, guilt, and shame will rise up, and the question, who's next, gets nearly asked by everybody. This is like piercing through that thin gossamer, that little veil that keeps our officers going back out there to fight another day. And but why, when it seems so futile, Why, when my life is such a mess, why do I have to do this? What's the problem? I'm the problem. Um, and if everybody's kind of walking on that thin ice and one guy falls through it, it's going to be asked who else is going to follow suit. People will transfer out of the department where there's been a suicide. The department asks if money will be spent for a funeral. And that's the question. Are we going to spend some money on this funeral? This guy shamefully killed himself. Will we do that to him? Will we do that for him? They'll bear departmental shame and hold legal concerns. Is there a liability? For individuals, shock and disbelief, and again, shame. Sorrow, sadness, and anguish, outrage, numbness, and indifference can be a problem. Now, intervention. If by any chance we come upon a person who seems to be contemplating suicide and we have an opportunity to intervene, don't wait for a suicide to have a program to avoid this issue. Consider the cost of that on law enforcement officers, like a bomb going off at the station. How do you create an intervention? Well, these are hard. We're going to be talking at a later time about alcohol and drugs and doing interventions. It's almost impossible to get these things going, but I'm not discouraging you from doing so. If there is somebody who is in crisis and you can get to them, you can put chaplains, psychologists, peer support, family liaison, line supervisors, command, and human resource personnel, and even assistance programs. All these professionals will be very motivated to stop somebody from going through with it. Maybe the situation is that a cop tried and failed once, so it's time to push through with an intervention. The chaplains may be the only ones asking these questions and trying to head off any and every incident. Questions we've been training you in are questions to ask, and let no man be left behind. If it happens, what if? If suicide happens, what do you do now? Questions. The police suicide funeral, is there a protocol or any policy at all about a suicide funeral? Who pays the bills? In long or short service with the department, does that change matters? Considerations, is there crime involved with this officer or illness, like mental illness or cancer or other factors contributing to the decision to kill himself? Will there be an honor guard? Will they be in uniform or out in the general audience? Will there be a procession? Will the family keep his badge? And will the media be brought in? All these questions will arise. And you can see right here why it's a sensitive question. We do have to break the silence, though. Less than 2% of all departments have a suicide prevention program. Chaplains can use access to prevent suicides. Silence gives the idea the department doesn't care, even when it does. Well, in Mark's department, they didn't care, apparently. Police have to police themselves, but be encouraged to intervene if we can. We can open out the discussion before it takes place, recognize the seriousness and lethality, even collateral damage of a potential suicide. We can address the tendency to avoidance, educate, intervene, support, get talk going. Talking about suicide doesn't encourage suicide. We can talk about it, and we can, it also brings out shame. If we're talking to cops about their committing suicide, they don't want to hear it because they feel that it's putting a hat on them saying, you know, you guys are weak, or you're sick, or you like to kill people, you don't want to kill yourself, you're crazy. Oh, that's not what we mean. But it's got to be dealt with sensitivity, of course, and done well. How about questions, anybody? Depressing subject, I know. A hard subject to deal with. These two today, both are tough. Okay. All right. Well, gonna let Danny, will you pray us out of here?
Father, thank you so much for the opportunity that you've given us to participate in this program to help our law enforcement. Father, we know what a difficult job they have, and thank you for Peter for the training. We pray that this would better equip us so that we can help people and do a better job with what we're called to do. So we thank you, Lord. We put the rest of this day into your hands. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, gentlemen. God bless you, and we'll see you next Thursday, bright and shiny at 1 o'clock. Adios.
Thanks. Bye.